Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly 3-Minute Therapy podcast with me, Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist, and Mick Berry, expert on REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, which uh, uh, is a type of therapy devised by Albert Ellis in the 1950s that comes from the basic premise that our emotions don't come from situations, as most people assume, but rather our emotions come from our thinking about our situations, in particular, our demands on ourselves, others, and life. I must do well and get approval. You must treat me well, and my life must be fair, easy, and hassle free. And as long as you believe those musts, you are cooked. But there's hope. You can question, challenge, and uproot your musts and show yourself all musts, all shoulds, all demands are fictions. There's nothing that must be. Reality is reality, not what you think it should be. So that's the basis of our discussions. And today we're going to be discussing a common fear with some people, and that is the fear of death, and show you using REBT how you could overcome it. The fear of death has a fancy name. It's thanatophobia. And it is understandable that people would have a fear of death. One reason is people easily create anxiety and fears for themselves about unwanted situations. Also, people have a self preservation instinct. Almost everyone who is alive would like to remain alive. And, but some people take the fear of death to an extreme and they obsess about it, worry about it, ruminate about it, and that just makes it worse. And we've discussed obsessions in other podcasts, but today it is about fear and anxiety about death. Mick, did you want to chime in there about death?
Well, actually, I see that the world has all sorts of organizations and philosophies and groups and followings and that are centered around people who can't give up the fear of death. And I'm not the only one to cite this, but religion is often, and I would go so far as to say usually, uh, based upon people fearing dying and formulating a religion to avoid getting over their fear of death. I'm interested in your viewpoint on that.
Actually, I'm not that much of an expert on religion, so I'll let you have the final word there. But
Okay.
one of the ways the fear of death emerges is by what people tell themselves, as I mentioned, musts and shoulds. So it's not the prospect of dying that causes the fear, but it's our thinking about it. I must not die. I must live forever. I must uh, have a legacy. I must avoid the pain of death. I must not leave things unfinished. I must not miss my friends and relatives. I absolutely must uh, not miss out on life. Everyone's going to be partying after I die, and there I am lying cold in the ground. That would be awful, terrible, or horrible. So those are some of the irrational beliefs people have about death. Nick, do you want to add to those?
Well, yeah, the thing is, you mentioned I must not miss out on everybody else partying. One of the ways, and this is, I wouldn't say this is necessarily REBT, but the thing is, people do put a lot of effort into leaving a legacy so that some important part of them, figuratively, of course, but nevertheless, something that they care about a great deal is left behind after they're gone. And so I think that Well, tell me if this relates to REBT, because there is something you can do if you think that you're going to be missing out and everybody else is going to be left here and you are no longer part of it. There are things that people do to contribute so that something they care about lasts beyond their lifetime.
Yeah, Albert, absolutely. Albert Ellis is a good example of this. Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotive behavior therapy, wrote over 80 books on the subject. So he's certainly left a legacy. And in some ways, Albert Ellis, his ideas still reside within us. So I think that's one way of doing it. Yeah, Mick?
Well, and I think also with that in mind, it could be a case when people have a fear of death that what they're really fearing is not being able to continue taking a part, being a part of life. And so that is something that can be done. But is that an REBT angle to say, well, I want to leave behind a legacy because I would be very upset if I no longer contribute to the well being of other people. So I want to leave behind a legacy.
Yeah, so it's not the only problem with what you said. That's not RVT, is because I want to leave behind a legacy because then I won't be upset. But it's not having a legacy or not being a legacy, not having a legacy that makes you upset, but rather it's your musts and shoulds about it. So remember, it's always our thinking that causes our emotions, not situations. Mick?
Yes. But the thing is, you could have a strong desire to partake in life and make a contribution to other people. And if you avoid the demand, well, I must be a part of life, and you could say, I can get a great deal of enjoyment by making a contribution to other people, then it would be REBT as long as you don't have a demand behind it. Now, it would be possible to make a contribution and still retain your demand. However, I think in that instance, the person would then continue to tell themselves, I haven't contributed enough. I must contribute more. And also be doing themselves in by not concentrating on what it is that they can do, but concentrating on how distressed they are that they're not doing enough rather than putting their attention on what they can actually do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, some people have the fantasy that once they die, in some sense, they'll they'll be able to come back. They'll still be alive somewhere. And Houdini put the lie to that. Houdini, who was a great magician, said that if someone could talk to you after they die, I will do it. And after Houdini died, he was never heard from again. So that didn't work. Yeah, man.
Well, yeah, but Houdini is simply only one individual, but this is not saying anything new. Shakespeare said, described death as that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. And I think you can understand that. Can you understand those words?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah. And so this is the case. And I think there are many different ways to fear death or dread death or have anxiety about death, but one of them is the demand, I must exist. And there are people who don't have that attitude. William Golding, who wrote Lord of the Flies, said, I'd really rather not believe in an afterlife. I like the idea of not being me for thousands of years. Me, ha.
Yeah, yeah. That highlights the notion that actually death has certain advantages, and that may be why some people don't wish to come back after they die. You're out of your pain, you're out of your hassles, you're out of your anxiety about death. As Albert Ellis has said, once you're dead as a dead duck for all eternity. So I think, and I think you agree with me, Mick, that's the reality.
Well, I think that's in almost all likelihood the reality, but I also think it's important to be careful. Once you're dead, all your problems will be over, because that's what people who are suicidal believe. But they rule out the fact that once you're dead, all of your enjoyment's going to be over too. And they conclude that it is impossible for me to enjoy myself alive, therefore, my best option is death. But of all the people who survive, jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge tends to be about 1 out of 50. 100% of the survivors say, after I jumped, I changed my mind
On the way down.
on the
Yeah.
way down. So let that be a lesson for
Yeah.
anybody who thinks about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we want to have, as REBT practitioners, as Albert Ellis said, we are hedonists and we are into long term hedonism. How much can we enjoy ourselves? That's what our goal is.
Yeah, and in terms of how much we can enjoy ourselves, the longer we live, the more we can enjoy ourselves. And there are ways, although you can't prevent death ultimately, there are ways you can live somewhat longer. For example, you could eat a healthy diet, you could make good life choices, you could exercise, get good sleep, be part of a social group. So if you do those things, you might be able to prolong your life somewhat over those who don't do those things. Mick, would you like to have the last word about death? And then we'll kill this podcast.
Well, I was going to quote Mark Twain, who said, I do not fear death. I was dead for billions of years before I was born and didn't suffer the slightest inconvenience because of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If you want to know what it's like to be dead, just think of what it was like before you were born. It's the exact same thing. In fact, there was no you before you were born. There's no you after you die.
And
Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing that has helped me get over fear of death is to fear the year 1862. It makes no sense to fear the year 1862 thinking I would have to fight in the Civil War. I'm never going to have to fight in the Civil War. I'm never going to have to live in 1862.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Great. Well, that concludes our podcast on death. We will be here again and again and again. So tune in. If you enjoyed this, give us a thumbs up and a like. Comment below if you had thoughts, suggest subjects, volunteer to be a guest. I think we have a guest coming up in the next few weeks. I do teletherapy. So if you're interested, you could contact me, 3minutetherapy.com. Is there a way people can contact you, Mick?
Yeah, they can go to my website, mick-berry.com, mick-berry.com. There's a contact on there.
Yeah, and in addition to being a Shakespearean scholar, Mick is a fantastic drummer. And thank you, Chris Rossini, our tech engineer. And stay on the rational side. Stay on the rational side of life. Do what, Mick?
Practice REBT to stay on the rational side of life.
Yeah.